Hi, Dave Scotland for cgswot.com, and welcome to another tutorial. Today we're going to be in After Effects, and this particular tutorial is in response to an email from a subscriber on CGSwot, and Steve Foster wrote us an email, wanted to have a look at an effect, that classic effect of having a moon sort of obscured by clouds and have the clouds sort of moving across the moon. And so what we're going to do is try to stay 100% in After Effects and try and create this entire effect in After Effects and composite it up using layers. We'll probably use some particular to create the clouds. And I've got a moon surface map from the NASA site, which is available to anyone that wants to download it. And this is the effect that we want to shoot for here. Very simple. It's a very simple effect. And there's just a couple of procedural things that we need to be aware of when we're using it. There's a lot of variation that you can give this particular effect. And this of course is just one of those variations, so this is a good one for you to have a go at and then get your own style, bring your own style into it and your own sort of color palette as well. So let's get started. What I've got here is the two maps that I'll be using. One is the as I mentioned before, the moon map that you can download from the NASA site. Now I'll include this in the download for the tutorial. And it's just the surface, it's a map of the surface of the moon, and then we have our smoke element that we're going to be using for the clouds, which is just a small smoke element, and that'll become a little bit more apparent as we get into the tutorial. So let's start with the moon first off, and we're just going to grab the map, drag it down to the new composition button here. And what that does is creates a new composition, and we'll just highlight the composition, hit enter, and we're just going to leave the name as moon, and that's what we have here. It's quite a large composition. And so if we come over to our effects here, and we're just going to type in CC space S just to bring up the CC sphere effect, and we'll drag it and drop it onto the footage, and that makes the moon into a spherical moon. And what we're going to do is just bring the radius up. That's probably going to do it there. And then we're just going to play with the lighting a little bit. We're just going to bring the light height around just a bit, because we want it to be a fairly full moon, and that's going to be fine for the moon. So the next thing we need to do is create our clouds, but oh yeah, we'll go ahead and create a new composition. So we'll just click on that composition button there. We're going to make it let's make it 1000 by 1000 is fine, and we'll leave the duration at 8 seconds 15 and 24 frames per second. We'll go OK to that. So there's our composition there, and we need to create a new solid to hold our particular effect, and we'll just call this we'll call it cloud particles, and comp size is fine. Might as well change the color swatch to 1. We'll go OK. So we've got our particles solid there. We're going to add our effect. Actually, just before we do that, let's go back to our project here and drag our smoke element down underneath. Now I'll just hide our particles. There's our smoke there, and what we need to do is just highlight it, and we'll just go layer, pre-compose, and we'll just leave it as smoke, and open new layer, leave all attributes, and go OK, and that just creates a pre-composition of just the smoke. And at the moment you'll see that there is no transparency. If I toggle my transparency here there's no transparency with the mask, so what we need to do is extract the transparency. So let's go layer, new, solid, and we'll just leave it white, make it comp size, and go OK. Drag it down beneath the smoke, and then we're just going to use the smoke with the track mat here. We're just going to use it as a loomer mat, and now when we toggle, we'll see that we do actually have some transparency there. Now we're going to take it a little bit further. I'm just going to add a little bit more detail to the smoke, and we can do that by highlighting the white solid there. We'll go into the effects, we'll right click in the effects panel, and we'll bring up noise, fractal noise, and you'll see now that it has quite a tight little fractal noise inside it there, and we need to just bring up, if we go into the transform here, we'll just bring up the size of that a little bit, and that's probably it there. And you can see the difference if I switch that on and off. It just brings a little bit more depth to the smoke element, and we still have our transparency there. So let's go back to our particles now. We might just rename this. At the moment it's called Comp 1. We'll just highlight it in the project window here, hit enter, and we'll call it clouds. And what we can do now is highlight our clouds. We'll hide our smoke element. It doesn't need to be visible. And we'll unhide our cloud particles. And in the effects, let's bring up Trapcode Particular. And the first thing we'll do is we'll just slide along the timeline a little bit here, and you'll see that it's just got its default particles. And we'll come down to the particle section. We'll change the particle type just to sprite is fine, and then just in the texture select smoke, and you'll see that the particles are actually quite small, so what we need to do is really crank up the size. Something like that's fine for now. We'll just give ourselves a bit of space here. So we'll crank up the size, maybe a little bit more. That looks pretty good. And size random, let's put the size random about 35, something like that. And let's go back up to the emitter, and we'll change our emitter from a point to a box, and we want to stretch that box. We'll probably leave the Y, just stretch it out. We give it a little bit of Z, stretch it out a little bit more, and that's probably going to do us. Now we can come back down to the particles here, and probably just increase the size. Oh, we'll leave the size there, but we'll just give the size random a little bit more, maybe put it up to about 55. That's probably going to do it. And what we can now do is just go into the we'll go into the physics. Probably got a few too many particles there, so we'll sort out our particle emitter now. We'll go back to frame 0, and we're really going to crank this up. Let's go about 4,000 on the particles, and then we'll go to frame 1 and set a keyframe for particles and knock that back to 0. But just go back to make sure that we do have a keyframe. Hit U to bring up that keyframe there if you want. We want to make sure that it is at frame 0 there are 4,000 particles there, so that when we do get to frame 1 that it's created those particles. And now that we've got all those particles there, we can just sort of stretch our emitter around a little bit, go a little bit taller on the emitter, a little bit wider. We've probably got a few too many particles, so back at frame 0, let's drop that back to 2,000 and then come through to have a look. Now we've got movement happening there, and we want to get rid of that, so what we can do, similar to the particle number there, we're going to come down to physics. We're going to set a keyframe at frame 0, and then we're going to come through to frame 1 and turn that down. We're actually going to turn it down to 0.1 instead of 0, which would stop the emitter altogether, we do want just a small amount of movement in those clouds. Now, we need to get a little bit more randomness to the clouds, and we can do that by coming back up to the particles section and just go into rotation, and we want to just twirl around the random rotation. Let's give it about 40 degrees should do it. And now let's just bring up the size a little bit. Size random, probably put that up to about 80, should be fine. And so we've got this band of cloud moving through there now. Now what we need to do is just a little bit more in the physics so that we can sort of leave a bit of a space over here for the moon to sort of shine through a little bit. So we're just going to go into the air under physics and come down to the spherical field, and if we switch on the visualize, we can actually see where the field is. I might just come across a little bit so we can see. We'll increase the strength, and you'll see if I go right to 100%, you can see that there's a red sort of area in the center of the screen there. Now if I blow up the radius, you'll see what happens. It actually pushes the clouds away. So let's pull that up a little bit, pull the radius up, probably about there is fine, and then we're just going to move it across to the left, the right, and then just move it up a little bit. Something like that's fine, and then you'll see now that we have a little bit of a gap there, which is going to work nicely. We might even need to try to reduce that turbulence. Maybe reduce the strength just a little bit. Go back down to about 50%. And we might just come to the top and take some of this velocity out. Put the velocity down about 5 and put the velocity distribution down to 0, and velocity from motion might as well be at 0, not that there's any motion in the scene. And that way we're just going to get a nice little subtle bit of movement in the clouds, and that's all we want, just a little bit of movement. So I can come back down maybe and increase that spherical strength again, just a bit, put it back up to 100. That's pretty much all we need for the clouds for now. We just switch off that visualize field, and we can start to build our main composition. So let's create a new comp, just clicking on the new comp button there. We'll call this one master setup, and this will be 720 by 408. It's going to give us a nice sort of widescreen feel to it, 24 frames per second, and instead of 8:15 on the time, we're just going to go 8. The extra frames are going to become apparent in a minute because we can't include those first few frames with the clouds, because it takes a couple of frames for the effect to sort of build. And now if I just drag those clouds down into that new comp, you'll see what I mean. There's nothing visible in that first frame, and it actually takes a frame to show up. So what we can do is just grab our clouds layer and just bring it one frame to the left, and now from frame 0 we can see our clouds. We can see we're getting a nice little bit of movement there. I think we could probably, I'll see, we're actually getting some popping. A couple of clouds are popping off there. So what we can do is just go back to our clouds, highlight the particles, go back to the effect, and what that is the particle life. So we're just going down to our particles here, and we're going to increase the life to 8 seconds, and that will stop the particles from popping off there. And we can probably increase the physics time. So if we just hit U to bring up all the animated tracks for cloud particles there, we're just going to go to frame 1 and increase that physics time to 0.2. and see if that's just going to give us a little bit more movement. And that's working fine. So we'll just go back to our master setup now. We might as well just grab our clouds and drag them across until the last frame lines up with the last frame of the effect, and that's going to be fine. So we'll go back to our project window and we can bring our moon down into the scene, and I'll just hide the clouds for now. We want to position that moon. So with it selected, we're just going to drag in, hold shift to keep it uniform, come in here, something like that's going to be fine. We'll just move it over to the left hand side, sort of a third in and a third up, something like that. We switch our clouds on now, and with the clouds highlighted, what we're going to do is squash them down a little bit. I'm going to squash them down and just bring them down slightly. That's probably a little bit too much in the squashing. Let's bring that back up a bit and then just bring it down. And that's going to work fine for position. So let's give it a little bit of animation now. Highlight the clouds, hit P to bring up your position, just hit a keyframe, go across to the last frame now, and just drag it across. Not much, just a little subtle movement. Moving across there is all we need. So that's going to work fine now, and what we need to do is play with some of the color correction side of things, just to give it a sort of a rim lit by the moon. So what we can actually do is highlight our clouds layer, Control D to duplicate the clouds. So we've got two copies of the clouds. We're going to hide the top copy for now. Then we're just going to create a new solid, just white is fine, and we're going to drag it down below the bottom cloud layer, and then we're going to use the alpha matte of the clouds, and this is what we get here. And what we can now do is switch on the overlaying clouds, highlight it, and then go into the effects. We'll go some color correction, and we'll just bring up levels. So we're using a levels color correction here, and we're just going to crush it down a little bit. Something like that's fine. It sort of takes a lot of the detail out of it, which is what we want, and just find a nice balance there that's going to give us sort of that cloud rimlet look. And what we can do, if we highlight the white solid that we created, we can give it a mask so that it falls off as it goes a little bit further away from the moon. So just highlight the white solid, bring up our ellipse mask tool, and then just draw a mask around the moon and get it roughly right, and then just hit Control T to bring up your transform and just make it a little larger. Something like that is fine. Now we'll go into the feather settings, and we're just going to feather it out. That's probably enough there, and it's sort of crushed it in a little bit. So let's use the mask expansion just to expand it out a little bit. Something like that's fine. And you can see the effect that we're starting to get there. We might even try and bring a little bit of brightness. Let's see if an add, no, sort of brings a bit of transparency there. Overlay's probably no good either. Now we'll leave it on normal for now. What we might actually do is just highlight it and try a glow. So just go stylize, glow, ramp it up the intensity a little bit. Radius, bring the radius about 10. I don't know how well that's working, but oh yeah, we're getting something there. That's probably going to do for now. So I'll have a look at a little closer on how that's working. So we're getting some nice movement across the moon. So like So let's have a look at the moon now and see what we can do to sort of give it a bit more of effect. And so we'll highlight the moon and hit Control D, and with the moon layer on top here, we're just going to bring an effect. We'll go blur sharpen and just give it a fast blur, and we're just going to blur it right out. I'll just isolate those two. So what we're doing there is just blurring out the moon quite a bit, probably about 200 on the blur, and then we're just going to switch the moon transfer layer mode to screen, and that gives us a nice glow there. I'll show you with or without. Makes quite a bit of difference. We can probably just bring up T for opacity and just knock it back a little bit on the opacity. Something like that's fine. Make it an even 50%. And then what I think we might do is just add just a hint of colour to it. We'll go for a blue moon scenario. So we'll just highlight that layer again, and we're just going to bring in a colour correction, hue and saturation. We'll switch on colorize. By default it's that red colour. We'll just bring up the saturation so we can see the colour that we want. And just slide through the hue values till you get something in that blue range. Something like that's fine, I think. And now we can just bring the saturation out just until we bring a hint of it in. That's probably it there. It's going to work nicely. So what we can do is maybe grab our white solid here, and let's give it a generate fill, and go for a bluey white color. Something like that, and maybe just bring the opacity of that maybe bring the fill up above the glow. Let's switch that glow off. Yeah, I don't think that glow is really giving us anything, so we'll leave the fill there. And then what we might do is just give it a little bit of brightness contrast and see if we can bring a little bit more out of that. Just a touch. And that's probably going to do it. I'll come in a little bit here and see how it looks. That's starting to work fairly nicely. It's probably a little bit too much blue coming through in that rim lighting there. So let's probably just take a little bit of the blue out of it. And that's going to work nicely. I just wonder, I really want to try to get a little bit more into that. So what we might do, we might just try a solid over the top of the whole image, and then we'll mask out an area around the moon here. Just move it across. Might even just switch it off so that we can see. Oop, undo that. Grab our mask there, Control T, and we'll just line it up, make it a little wider. Something like that is fine. And what we'll do is switch that back on. We'll bring up the feather for the mask, just feather it out a bit. That's probably fine. And then we'll switch it to, we'll try an overlay. No good. Maybe an add screen. Let's go through these. I'm using shift and plus and minus just to find a, well, that one's pretty good. I do like that. That one's pretty good. So what we can do is first we'll hit T and just bring down the opacity a little bit on it. That's probably, we'll leave it for now. We'll grab our cloud layer that's basically our rim lighting cloud layer there, and Control D and drag it up above that layer that we've just created, and we want to use it as an alpha matte of that layer. Now we might as well grab both of those and bring it down to just above the rim light layer there. So basically we have those, it's just a bit of added extra sort of brightness there. So if we switch these off now, we're getting that there. Now we can bring up our T and just bring that back a little bit. We might just grab that and pull it above the other layer. That's worked a lot better. So what it's actually done is brightened up the base cloud as well, which is the sort of inner detail of the clouds, not the rim lighting detail. So that looks fine. What we need to maybe do is give it some background stars. So let's create a new solid. We'll just make it black, although the colour's not that important. And we'll just call this stars. Make it comp size. And go OK. And we'll just drag that to the bottom. We'll leave it at the top while we set it up. And we're just going to create an effect, noise and fractal noise, and we're just going to bring the transform down to 2 in the scale. Makes it a really tight little noise. Will really ramp up the brightness, and then we're just going to drop the ramp the contrast up and then just drop the brightness until we get some stars. Don't go crazy on the stars, just a couple around is all you need. And then we're just going to drag that down beneath the moon, and that's just going to help bring out the moon and also the clouds here, because they're blocking the stars. The movement, even though we don't see a lot of color detail, we're getting some nice movement there. Okay, it's starting to look pretty good, and I think what we could do is give it a little bit of an ethereal feel to it, a little bit of sort of a fantasy feel to it. So let's go with a layer, new adjustment layer over the top, and to that layer we'll just add an effect of a blur sharpen. We'll go a fast blur, repeat on edges, and then wind it up. Makes everything blurry in the shot here. Wind it up to about, let's go to about 30, and then change that layer type to screen, and then just hit T and just drop it down. Let's go to about 30. That's going to work nicely, and I'll switch that on and off to show you. It makes just a little bit of difference to the feel of the shot. And what we might do also is our base moon layer. We'll switch those two moon layers on. The base moon is really too crisp and sharp, so let's just grab the base moon layer. We'll also go with a fast blur, and we'll just give it a blur of about 2. We can go a little bit higher, I guess, maybe 3, and that's going to work nicely now. Okay, so we have our clouds sort of moving across there. We are get some popping in the clouds. I might just go back to our clouds layer here, try and work out what's popping there. Something popping right there in the shot. So let's see if we can work out what that is. I guess the first thing we could do is we'll drop our life back to about 6, and we'll up the life random to about 50. What I'm looking for is to just sort of fade some clouds off as that little bit of movement is coming through there. So we'll come down. We're in the particles section here, and we're looking for opacity. And so once you find opacity here, just go opacity over life and just draw a graph down. We'll draw it back up like this. and that's going to work nicely. We could smooth it. We're still getting that popping. So I might just see if I can negate it a little bit. Velocity random will take that off. See if that's helped it. It looks like it's just popping onto screen there. Let's go. I'll just at frame 1 here. What I'm going to do is just switch this physics time to 0 and see if it's the actual physics that are causing the pop. And it is. So it's got something to do with the physics. Might pop that to back to point 2 at frame 1. And we'll come down to our physics here and see if we can find something in our physics. We might just bring our strength back a little bit on the spherical field there. And that's certainly reduced it a little bit. And might increase the feather. I might increase the feather and then increase the strength as well. And that's work there. And I'm just going to put the particles per not the particles per second, the life of the particles back up to 8. Might even go 9. And that looks like it's working fine now. So let's go back to our master setup. So we're getting some nice movement there. I think what we might be able to do is just give it another, we'll call this adjustment layer blur screen, and then we'll give it another adjustment layer over the top and give it a color correction and just bring some curves into it. We're just going to darken it down a little bit and give it a little bit more contrast, not too much, just a bit. That's probably going to work fine. And we can now, I'd like to bring a little bit of sort of camera style movement, just a bit of zoom, so we don't need to really create a camera there. Just rename that screen to that adjustment layer to curves. And maybe even in the curves we could probably just go into our blue and just increase our blue just slightly, not too much, and just bring a bit of the red out of it. That's probably enough there, I think. Maybe a bit of green out of it. Yeah, not sure whether I like that. Might just reset that curves and then just do the RGB, darken it down, give it a bit of contrast. That's going to work nicely. We'll see what it looks like just putting that curves underneath the blur screen. Yeah, I think that's going to work nicely. So let's the clouds are a little bit dark here, so what we can do is just highlight that overlaying cloud, this one here, and the one that we crushed the colours in the levels there. And what we can do with that overlaying cloud is I'll switch all the layers back on. I'm just going to bring up a colour correction tint, and the black, I'm just going to bring the black out of black a little bit. Just do a little bit of colour back into it. Might just zoom in here a bit. So what we're doing is, instead of a pure black, we're just going to bring a little bit of colour back up into it. Not too much. We might even grab the white and drop it down a little bit. We'll see how that's looking. Yeah, I think that's working nicely. I'm not too happy with the colour of our sort of kicker or backlighting there, so what we'll need to do, bring a bit more saturation into it. Just hunt around in the colour picker here just until you find something that's working a bit better. I think that's going to do it. And we might actually just grab our mask for that one. Hit MM to bring up our mask, and we might just expand our mask out a little bit more and bring our feather down a little bit. Something like that is fine. I think that's working nicely. Okay, so what we can do is just in our project window now, we can grab the the master setup and drag it down onto a new composition button there, and that creates a copy of it. We'll just hit enter, and we'll call this one master output. And so we have our master output here, and if we hit S for scale, what we can do is just scale our shot in a little bit, bring it across, something like that is fine. Create a keyframe, come all the way across to our 8-second, and then just scale it out. And what that's going to do is just give us a little bit of movement in the camera, and that's going to work nicely. Just not sure whether those over the top clouds are working there. Don't like those details coming through. So we'll just select that layer, which is this one here, and let's crush some of those whites out a bit more. I think that's going to work nicely. We could probably bring a bit of blue into that colour. Just a bit, just a hint. And maybe even with the black, if we select a sort of a blue range, just bring that across. I think that's going to help it. Yeah, that just helps it and stops it from being so monotone black out on the edges here. And the moon itself, let's just amend this hue a little bit. Just going to bring it back into the green, bring the saturation up on it a little bit. We might even just bring the, oh no, that's okay there. And the hue and saturation, we're working on the overlay layer here, the screen overlay for the moon. And what we might do is just give it a little bit of color correction, brightness, contrast, just see if we can bring it up just a little bit. Something like that, something -10 on the contrast, a little bit brighter. And I think that's going to work nicely, so there it is there, and I'll kick off a RAM preview. So basically what we've got there is an effect that's completely created in After Effects, and I really suggest that you have a bit of a play with this technique, mainly for the clouds and using Particular to create some nice clouds, and maybe even play with the aspect of the shot. At this point, you know, as you look at it, there's really not a lot of 3D depth to the clouds, and you might want to have a look at maybe using we used a box emitter, maybe use the 3D emitter settings a little bit more to your advantage by pushing your box emitter into the Z size a little bit more, and see what you get there. So there's the effect there. It's moving, the clouds are moving nicely through there. I could probably just quickly go back into the clouds here, and the physics time, we'll go back to that frame there, and we'll just go 0.3 on the physics time. Well, it's probably way too high. 0.2. We'll just undo whatever I did there to destroy the entire effect. Let me just come in here, the physics time. I guess maybe instead of affecting the physics time, let's just go back into physics and set up a little bit of wind. And see if that's going to give us a little bit more of what we're looking for. We'll probably go a little bit more on it. Probably don't need it in the Y, maybe a little bit in the Z, and that's probably going to help the effect. We've got some nice movement there now. So yeah, as I said, play with it. You can certainly get a lot of different style or stylization from tweaking the settings and tweaking the color correction side of things. But I just wanted to show you how quickly you can throw something together, and it's a very difficult. This is actually a good exercise because it's a very difficult thing to actually go out and film. Night filming is not an easy thing to do, and pointing a camera at the moon and getting the clouds to do what you want them to do is obviously impossible. So this way you can actually get a shot and have it work the way you want it to work. And we've done this without using any volumetric particle effects or anything like that. We've basically just used particular and a single smoke element. In 3D you would be able to turn to things like combustion and things like that to get a similar effect. But basically this is a quick and easy way to get that effect in After Effects. So have a bit of a play with it. I hope you have some success and bring your own style to the effect. That's it for me. Until next time, bye for now.